On this Sunday night, in a holding pattern, hundreds of Canadians trapped in China.
It's frustrating to say the least.
The complications Canada faces to get citizens home.
We're waiting for permission from the Chinese government.
As the new coronavirus claims a life outside of China. The race for the Democratic nomination. Why the Iowa caucuses count. Plus, the U.S. president's war on birth tourism. And the Canadian doctor competing in the Super Bowl.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The new coronavirus has reached a grim milestone. A 44-year-old man in the Philippines has become the first death outside of China. The death toll in China, the epicenter of the outbreak, is now over 350. More than 16,000 people have become infected. Hundreds of Canadians remain stranded in the country. The Canadian government has chartered a plane that is on standby to get them home. Ottawa insists it is waiting for the Chinese government to give it authorization to land. Once that happens, the plane will head to Canadian Forces Base Trenton, where the evacuees will undergo health screenings. The crew and Canadians returning will then be quarantined at the base for 14 days. But as Abigail Bimman explains, there's a lot of confusion among permanent residents.
We really want to go home. Canada is our home.
Bin Jung's two young kids are Canadian citizens. He and his wife, permanent residents. Canada says China won't let permanent residents on the Canadian evacuation flight, but Chinese officials told him they have no such policy. Now he has no idea whether his family of four will be allowed to board.
It's frustrating to say the least. But again, we are all hopeful.
We expected more communications from them. So even if it's just to say, hey guys, just letting you know that we know that you're in China, we're there for you, and we're working on something.
A crew is trained and ready to go. We're waiting for manifest to know which passengers are on that plane, and we're waiting for permission from the Chinese government. We've offered to help China with medical supplies. We're doing everything we should do, but we're also not panicking.
While the government still can't say when the flight will leave, Global News has obtained this email sent to Canadians in Hubei. It tells people to submit personal information to Global Affairs by Monday and says they'll try to provide 24 hours notice before the flight. But it also says space is limited and may not be guaranteed. The latest numbers show 325 people want to get out. There could be more passengers than seats on the one flight in the works. Global Affairs says it will keep working to get Canadians out.
I actually prefer to stay in Wuhan with my parents.
Felicity Fang runs a restaurant with her husband in Montreal, but is visiting her parents in her hometown, Wuhan. Her father is helping build one of two new hospitals for coronavirus patients. He's one of the few people outside all day and allowed to drive.
My whole life, I've never seen Wuhan like this. It's kind of scary. It's very, very quiet. I feels like living in a scary movie.
Scary, too, for those waiting for information from Ottawa about getting out, with so many unanswered questions about who can board the plane and what will happen when it lands back in Canada. The email from Global Affairs says only one carry-on bag allowed per person. One family tells me their bags are packed, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Robin?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Citizens from more than half a dozen other countries have been able to get out of China thanks to their governments. Today, more than 100 Australians in Wuhan boarded a flight that will take them to Christmas Island, where they'll spend the next 2 weeks in quarantine. And tonight, there are reports 6 Chinese officials have been fired for how they handled the outbreak. Ross Lord reports.
More than 200 Indonesian nationals arrive home after being moved out of China, mostly from Hubei province. Their next move being flown to another location, away from residential neighborhoods. This police official hopes placing them in quarantine will run smoothly. A growing number of countries are moving their citizens to safety, something Canadian officials have signaled they are ready to do.
The government has secured a chartered aircraft and is now working on the diplomatic front with officials in China to obtain the authorizations to proceed with an assisted departure. This latest crisis is occurring after a long period of instability in Hong Kong and, as you are well aware, a difficult year in Canada-China relations.
But hundreds of Canadians are still in limbo. The Philippines, meantime, has a dubious distinction. A 44-year-old Chinese man developed severe pneumonia and died.
This is the first reported death outside China. However, we need to take into mind that this is not a locally acquired case. This patient came from the epicentre of this outbreak, Wuhan, China.
The Philippines has blocked entry to travelers from China. New Zealand, Iraq, and Indonesia are also imposing new restrictions. Health authorities in Canada suggest the risk of individual infections is relatively low, urging people to practice good hygiene just in case. But inside China, authorities have fired 6 officials in Hubei province for handling the outbreak poorly. A New York Times report claims the government put secrecy and order ahead of confronting the coronavirus to keep the public from panicking and to avoid political embarrassment. The number of confirmed cases could keep growing because thousands of specimens from suspected cases have yet to be tested. A long way to go before this public health crisis goes away. Ross Lord, Global News.
A man shot dead by police after he went on a stabbing rampage in London was released from prison just days ago after serving time for terror offenses. Today's attack happened in South London in the afternoon. Witnesses say a man armed with a machete walked into a shop and stabbed a man in the stomach before he fled and stabbed a woman on a bicycle. He appeared to be wearing a suicide vest, later deemed a hoax, and sparked a bomb scare when he dropped a bag on the road.
Go to the back of the store! Go to the back of the store! Get back! Come on!
There was no explosive device, but undercover officers took no chances and shot him dead. Police say they are confident the suspect is Sudesh Aman, who was in his early 20s. He had served half of a 3-year sentence for spreading extremist Islamist material. He was under police surveillance at the time of the attack. Britain's Foreign Secretary says the UK will not be aligning with the European Union's trade rules. Instead, it wants a deal similar to the EU's arrangement with Canada. Britain and the EU are expected to start negotiating a future trade framework in March. Today, Dominic Raab said Britain is seeking a deal that imposes very few tariffs, like a Canada-style free trade pact with Europe and its member states.
We will not be insisting that they align with our rules as the price of a free trade deal with the UK. That's not the way free trade deals are done globally, and I'm sure that the EU will want to adhere to their commitment to a Canada-style, best-in-class free trade agreement, and there's great opportunity there on all sides.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will spell out his government's trade stance in a speech tomorrow. In the U.S., Democrats are gearing up for a big day in the race to take on President Donald Trump. The Iowa caucuses take place tomorrow, the first chance for candidates to face voters. The field has narrowed, but there are still 11 candidates vying for the Democratic nomination. Tomorrow's outcome could see presidential hopes fade for a number of them. It's the first in a long run of caucuses and primaries. As Jennifer Johnson reports, even the frontrunners have a fight ahead of them before one of them goes head-to-head with Trump.
Democratic presidential candidates courting Iowa voters on the eve of their first campaign showdown, Monday night's Iowa caucus. The entire nation looking to this state of just over 3 million voters to see who they think should take over the White House.
This is it. This is our moment in history.
In this final sprint, candidates are making last-minute pitches to Iowans. Voters hearing from those leading the pack, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and former Vice President Joe Biden.
We need a president who can bring us together, a leader who can unite the party, unite our country.
As President Trump predicts his own re-election, a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows the president trailing Biden, Sanders, and Warren.
I believe that we are the strongest campaign to defeat Trump.
In that poll, the president is also behind Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the first openly gay presidential candidate.
I think I'm the best candidate to bring people together now.
Sanders, Warren, and Senator Amy Klobuchar have had to interrupt their campaigns for the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump.
Duty called, and I think you all know how important this hearing was this week.
In 2016, Donald Trump lost in Iowa to Senator Ted Cruz. Right or wrong, people here are aware how powerful their decision is.
I view this as an extremely important election because we live in a divided time. Our leader is very much trying to divide us with hate. and I really think we need to win this election.
As the Senate impeachment trial continues Monday, the eyes of Americans will also be focused on Iowa as their voters decide who should be the Democratic Party's nominee. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
It's only a matter of time before the Republican-controlled U.S. Senate acquits President Trump in his impeachment trial. Republicans and Democrats will begin their closing arguments on Monday. On Friday, senators voted against calling new witnesses, including Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. Bolton's soon-to-be-released book reportedly provides new details about the president's efforts to put pressure on Ukraine to investigate Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. One Republican senator argues Bolton's testimony wouldn't have changed the outcome of the trial.
I mean, if you have 8 witnesses who say someone left the scene of an accident, why do you need 9? I mean, the question for me was, do I need more evidence to conclude that the president did what he did? And I concluded, no.
A new poll from NBC News and the Wall Street Journal found 52% of registered voters believe the president abused his power. But voters remain divided over whether he should be removed from office. A slim majority, 49%, believe Trump should remain in the White House. Still to come, a mudslide at a resort in BC leaves hundreds stranded. And the threat of coronavirus to businesses in Canada. A landslide has left hundreds of people stranded at a ski resort in BC. The slide happened Friday evening after heavy rainfall across the southern part of the province. The Sasquatch Mountain Resort is about 130 kilometers east of Vancouver, near the community of Agassiz. The road leading to and from the resort is impassable, and it could take up to 6 days to clear it. A helicopter has been hired to airlift people out of the area, but at a cost of $150 per person. The coronavirus scare is being felt by business owners across Canada. Travel agencies, restaurants, even grocery stores are all feeling the effects. Here's Dan Spector.
It's nothing like this out there. Eric Koo runs Dobie and Andy restaurant in Montreal's Chinatown. Lunchtime is usually busy, but this week things started off really slow. He thinks people may have been scared away by coronavirus.
It gradually got better during the week, and now it's just normal.
At this gift shop, they said things are slower than usual. They weren't the only ones to say so off camera.
It's affected, actually. How many trips?
James Ma runs a travel agency. He says some of his clients are stranded because of Air Canada suspending all flights to China, and that he's being forced to cancel trips that had already been booked.
January, February, March, April, I think we'll have no revenue.
With no indication of when travel to China will be back to normal, he's expecting a big hit.
Dumpling cat?
This dumpling shop has not noticed any slowdown, but has seen one difference.
People start to panicking and a lot of people wear masks.
There have been reports of racism against Chinese Canadians related to the virus, but Calvin Lam said he's just noticed the usual.
Coronavirus, racism, not yet, but other racism, yes.
In spite of tightening travel restrictions and misinformation swirling across Canada, in Vancouver's Chinatown, the biggest in the country, people we spoke to said things seem normal.
If someone coughs next to me, it comes to my mind, but not really.
I haven't noticed anything.
Back at Dobie and Andy in Montreal, they feel after a period of alarm, the fear seems to have died down.
There's no real reason to stay home and then just came back out, you know?
And their hope is that things will continue to be business as usual. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Still ahead, the politics behind Trump's crackdown on birth tourism.
Want weather on the go? Pinpointed with the free Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Reliable, accurate, and easy to use. It's like having a direct line to a meteorologist. The Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Forecast calls for download. You're watching Global National.
A tragic turn of events at a church meeting in Tanzania. 20 people, including 5 children, were crushed to death during a stampede. It happened in Moshi, near the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro on Saturday. Hundreds were there to listen to a popular preacher who promises prosperity and cures for sickness. The stampede was caused when the church faithful rushed to walk on anointed oil to be healed. The preacher has since been arrested. Somalia declared a national emergency today as large swarms of locusts spread across East Africa. The United Nations says the swarms are the largest ever seen in Somalia and in Ethiopia in 25 years. The desert locust is considered the most dangerous of its species. They fly together by the millions, devouring crops. Somalia's Ministry of Agriculture says the insects pose a major threat to the country's already fragile food security situation. President Donald Trump's controversial new policy is putting the spotlight back on immigration. The U.S. will no longer issue visas to pregnant women from certain countries to crack down on so-called birth tourism, which guarantees children born in America automatic citizenship. But as Reggie Cicchini reports, critics argue the problem isn't as big as the president claims and is being used to rally his base in an election year.
In a crucial election year for U.S. President Donald Trump, his administration is once again using immigration as a rallying cry.
They really believe that immigration is not great for the country.
The latest target, pregnant women who want to give birth in America.
Suddenly, women, in their view, are reduced to, their reproductive capacity.
The U.S. gives citizenship at birth.
Everything that you have is guaranteed. Welfare, public benefits, right?
It's led to a rise in birth tourism. Now, travel visas won't be issued to pregnant women unless they have a valid reason for visiting. The White House claims the policy is necessary to enhance public safety and national security.
This is just one more policy in a long line of misbegotten immigration policies that assumes that all immigrants are presumptively lawbreakers.
But it raises questions on the burden of proof for women.
It's denying them the right to travel and just in case they might be pregnant. It's all about control of women's bodies.
To combat birth tourism in the Northern Mariana Islands, a U.S. territory, officials had requested that some airlines administer pregnancy tests as a part of a fit-to-fly assessment. That practice is no longer in use. President Trump has used immigration in the past to spark fear in his base.
They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
But this move isn't trying to stop border jumpers. It's trying to end birthright citizenship.
The courts would not let him do it. And so it's a promise that you can make, and then you can blame others for making it impossible to happen.
It's estimated that in the U.S. alone, 10,000 babies were born to foreign mothers in 2017.
That number probably includes plenty of people who are here for totally legitimate other reasons.
Birth tourism is not uniquely American. It's a growing issue in Canada, too. Richmond, BC has become a destination for foreign expectant mothers. Consular officials in the U.S. won't question all pregnant women, raising concerns about how effective this new policy will be.
When you're pregnant, your life continues.
And how immigration in the U.S. has once again become the focus of an election campaign. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Up next, how a Canadian doctor went from tackling medicine to tackling the Super Bowl. It's Groundhog Day yet again, but with some conflicting opinions. In Wyerton, Ontario, Willie emerged from his burrow and did not see his shadow, signaling an early spring, but only after the town's mayor, Janice Jackson, misinterpreted it, announcing winter was staying put. She did correct herself, though.
I'm going to try this again. What am I saying? It's an early spring!
And the other rodent in Nova Scotia had his handlers take to social media to let the public know Shubenacadie Sam did see his shadow, which could mean at least 6 more weeks of winter.
Great footwork from Ricky Latelli, who's tried to offload.
In the UK, it was a rough Super League debut for the Toronto Wolfpack in its first match as part of the top division. The team's 23-game winning streak came to an end with a 28-10 loss against the Castleford Tigers. None of the team's players is Canadian. They train in the UK for most of the year. But they're hoping more success in the league will attract more support from Canadian athletes and fans alike. A Canadian is making football history today. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif is the first medical doctor to play in the NFL and in a Super Bowl. The 28-year-old is part of the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line. And as Amanda Jelowicki reports, the Quebecer is managing to juggle 2 careers.
For years, advisors told Laurent Duvernay-Tardif to make a choice, professional football or medicine. Doing both, they said, was impossible. He didn't listen.
Starting at guard from McGill University in Montreal.
Now, the Montreal native becomes the first doctor to compete in the Super Bowl.
I was doing it for me, but also to prove everybody that they were wrong.
28-year-old Duvernay-Tardif attended McGill University, studying medicine. He quickly became a star on the football field.
We started right from the beginning. I mean, just his size was quite staggering to see, but after just his technique.
His dream, though, was never to win a Super Bowl, but to become an emergency room physician.
He told me always, if McGill doesn't allow me to continue my med school in the off-season, I'm not going to continue football.
After the Kansas City Chiefs drafted him in 2014, McGill agreed to a part-time schedule. And despite signing a $42 million contract, he kept working in medicine.
Patients saw this massive guy come in. There was no gloves almost that would fit him. It was always the largest size glove possible. The gowns looked overly small on him. He absolutely was outperforming many of his peers. He did very well.
He followed a grueling schedule in the off-season, exercising, studying, and working late in hospitals. He completed his degree in 8 years instead of 4.
That's the hardest part of my career and my year, is to transition from football, last game of the season, to first shift in the hospital at 6 in the morning as a medical student at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah. 2 years after graduating, he's in the Super Bowl, and his hometown is celebrating.
For a Montrealer to be in the biggest sporting event in the world, which has never happened before, I think it's pretty incredible, actually.
I tell them all the time, listen, you're not here, but there's a lot of people that are supporting you. The province is behind you. The country is behind you.
As a McGill grad, I'm very excited to see a right guard from McGill, who happens to be a doctor as well. That's a source of pride for all Canadians.
And win or lose, he's already accomplished so much. Amanda Jelowicki, Global News, Montreal.
What a great story. That is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Lethbridge, Alberta. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen will be here tomorrow, and I'll see you next weekend. Have a great night.